and welcome. I'm Rachel Walters, and this is the first episode of Sacred Thorns, where we meet God in the wounds that won't heal and the prayers that seem unanswered. Before we begin, I want you to know what this podcast is and what it isn't. This isn't a podcast about miracle pregnancies or 7 steps to overcome your suffering. This is a podcast about living faithfully in the middle of unanswered prayers, about finding God in the waiting, and about the women and men who carry invisible crosses every single day. My husband and I got married in 2014. Like many couples, we had a plan. I'd finish my master's degree, we'd get settled, and then we'd start our family. We were young, healthy, and naive in the way that people are when they've never had their deepest assumptions challenged. In 2017, I became critically ill and almost died. I was so ill that having children moved from not yet to not now to what if never. But I recovered, and then we were ready, or so we thought. I still remember those early days with such clarity. I was charting from day one, taking my temperature every morning like a sacrament of hope. I had apps, spreadsheets, and so much optimism. My husband's vision was beautiful and simple. We'd build our family together. It would take no time at all. Month 1 passed, then month 2. By month 6, I knew. The knowing came not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow, creeping certainty, like watching the sunset and realizing the darkness isn't temporary. Something's not right, I told my sister, showing her my carefully documented charts. The data that was supposed to guide us to parenthood had become evidence of what wasn't happening. The medical journey began. Blood tests, procedures, surgeries, luteal phase defect, and diagnoses that sounded like foreign languages. Endometriosis. Thyroid dysfunction from my previous illness. My body temperature too low for conception. Such a small thing. Fractions of a degree between possibility and impossibility. I grew up in a Protestant tradition that didn't talk much about suffering, except to say that God would bless the faithful. There wasn't room for long-term struggle in the theology I knew. Suffering was something to be prayed away, not lived through. Suffering was to be suffered through, and you kept repeating, "This too shall pass, this too shall pass, this too shall pass." I had tried medications that made me feel like a train had hit me. We attempted IUI, intrauterine insemination, and even my non-religious husband felt uncomfortable with it. He watched the clinical procedure and later told me that he felt like an outsider to what should have been an intimate moment of creating life together. When IVF became the next option, I was desperate. The kind of desperate that makes you willing to burn everything to the ground if it means getting what you want. I would have maxed out credit cards, taken out loans, and destroyed our financial future. Anything to become a mother. But then my husband said something that stopped me cold. He told me the decision wasn't his. The decision was mine. That IVF really wouldn't involve him, except for semen donation. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He was being honest about how disconnected he felt from the process. In that moment, I realized I was so focused on becoming a mother that I was forgetting about being a wife. The very partnership that made me want children in the first place was being pushed aside in my desperation. My secular husband, through his simple honesty, spoke a truth that I'd later discover echoed in centuries of Christian wisdom about marriage and unity. I remember declaring, "I am done. I am not putting my body through this anymore." Everything had hit me really early in 2020. The world was shutting down, and my dreams of motherhood felt like they were being shut down with it. 2020 to 2023 were the 3 darkest years of my life. And it was during this time that I returned to church, really returned, not just Sunday morning attendance. I've come to understand that infertility isn't just a medical condition or an emotional journey and a grief process. It's a spiritual battlefield. There's an intersection where our pain meets our faith, and how we navigate it shapes everything that follows. I wrestled with God like Jacob in the desert. I wrestled with bitterness as I watched pregnancy announcements multiply on social media. I wrestled with jealousy that ate at me like acid. But I also began to sense something else, that this wrestling wasn't just with my own disappointment. There was an enemy who wanted to use my pain to separate me from God and to make me believe lies about my worth, my purpose, my faith. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with lasting suffering. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who love you but don't understand. They offer solutions like spiritual band-aids. Just relax, it'll happen. Go on vacation. Everything happens for a reason. God never gives you more than you can handle. I remember someone from my childhood church telling me 4 years into this journey that if I would just return to their specific tradition, wear my hair a certain way, dress a certain way, attend their particular church, then God would bless me with a baby. They deliver this promise with absolute certainty, no doubts at all. What they didn't understand, what many don't understand, is that this kind of encouragement carries a devastating implication. That my suffering is somehow my fault. That I'm not faithful enough, not obedient enough, just not enough. But here's what I've learned. Sometimes the most faithful thing that you can do is stop trying to earn what was always meant to be a gift. I was raised in a tradition influenced by what's often called the prosperity gospel, sometimes called the just name it and claim it movement. The idea that if you have enough faith, God will bless you materially. While my church never preached it explicitly, the undercurrent was there. Good things happen to faithful people. This theology works beautifully when life goes according to plan. It crumbles when suffering lasts longer than a season. Because what do you do in year 3, year 5, year 7 of unanswered prayers? Either God isn't good, you aren't faithful enough, or the entire framework is flawed. I remember the moment this theology began to crack for me. I was sitting in a service where testimony after testimony celebrated answered prayers, new jobs, healed relationships, yes, pregnancies. And I sat there, having just learned my endometriosis had worsened, wondering, where is God in the ongoing no? Where is the sacred in the sustained silence? That question led me on a journey through church history I never expected to take. I discovered that for centuries, Christians have understood suffering not as a sign of God's absence, but as a mysterious participation in Christ's own wounds. From the desert fathers and mothers who fled to wilderness places, to Julian of Norwich, who wrote about God's presence in her illness, to modern believers who found God not in the healing, but in the hemorrhaging. There was another way to understand pain. One of the most profound shifts in my journey came when I began to understand that this battle wasn't just medical or emotional. It was deeply spiritual. And in spiritual warfare, sometimes our wounds become our most powerful weapons. Think about it. After the resurrection, Jesus kept his wounds. He could have returned perfected, unscarred. Instead, he invited Thomas to place his fingers in the very places that had caused his death. Those wounds became proof of his victory, not his defeat. What if our wounds work the same way? What if the very places where we've been pierced become the spots where God's light shines through most brilliantly? I've experienced this firsthand. The enemy wanted to use my infertility to make me bitter, isolated, and convinced of my worthlessness. I will admit that for several years it did. I'd be lying otherwise. But every time I choose vulnerability over hiding, every time I reach out to another woman carrying this cross, every time I offer my pain for someone else's healing, my wounds become a weapon against the very forces that sought to destroy me through it. Does this mean the struggle is over? No, not at all. Holidays and certain times of the year are still hard, but I'm learning to lean on him. I had been raised in church 3 times a week and more during revival or camp meetings from the day I came home from the hospital as a newborn. The church I attended didn't emphasize baptism, so I never took that step. In September of 2022, I decided to be baptized. As I stood in those baptismal waters, I felt God ask me something I wasn't prepared for. Leave your desire for motherhood in this water. Not, I'll give you a child if you let go. Not, trust me and it will happen. Just leave it here. That moment in the baptismal waters was when everything changed. Not because my circumstances shifted, but because I began to understand that God might use my wounds for something I couldn't yet see. Through unexpected conversations, ancient Christian writings, and the wisdom of traditions beyond my own, I discovered concepts that revolutionized how I view suffering. That our pain could be joined to Christ's pain for redemptive purposes. That spiritual motherhood was as real as biological motherhood. That unity in marriage meant more than I had ever understood, something my husband had instinctively known when he resisted the clinical nature of assisted reproduction. That some of the earliest Christians understood suffering not as a punishment, but as participation in something sacred. That my cross, this very cross that I wanted to throw off, could become a weapon in spiritual warfare. I learned that throughout church history, from the earliest desert mothers to medieval mystics to modern day believers, Christians have understood that God doesn't waste our wounds. He transforms them. My friend who walks her own path with secondary infertility and pregnancy loss is the reason you're listening to this now. She texted me something that captures why we're here. There are too many podcasts with quick fixes and advice for perfect endings. This leaves a lot of women feeling left out, or like they are just another thing that needs to be fixed. But what if they really just need to know other women are out there just like them who don't have the ending that they prayed for? This podcast isn't about answers, it's about presence. It's not about fixing your suffering, it's about finding meaning within it. It's not about happy endings, it's about the holy, messy middles. We'll draw from the deep wells of Christian tradition, Orthodox, Catholic, Protestant, and ancient sources that predate our divisions, because I've learned that wisdom about suffering doesn't belong to any one faith tradition. It belongs to all of us who follow a Savior acquainted with grief. So here is what I'm offering: a space where we can be honest about suffering without rushing to silver linings. A place where we can explore how the full breadth of Christian tradition approaches pain without pretending any of it makes it easy. A gathering where those of us carrying invisible crosses can set them down for a moment and rest. Over the coming weeks, we'll explore what it means when God uses our wounds. We'll learn about spiritual warfare that happens in hospital waiting rooms and silent bedrooms. We'll discover forgotten women whose stories echo our own. We'll ask hard questions and sit with the discomfort of incomplete answers. I've been carrying this cross of infertility for 7 years now. My husband has been carrying it with me in his own way, often silently. What I've discovered is that sometimes the very suffering we want to escape becomes the ground where we meet God most profoundly. Your journey may look different. Your cross may have another shape. Maybe you're walking through chronic illness, carrying the weight of a diagnosis that changed everything. Maybe you're in year 10 of caregiving for someone you love, watching them fade while you pour yourself out daily. Maybe you're navigating a marriage that looks nothing like what you dreamed, or grieving dreams that will never come to pass. Maybe your thorn has a name I haven't mentioned: depression that won't lift, a prodigal child who won't come home, a calling that remains unclear. But if you're tired of being told to just relax, just pray harder, or just trust more, you're in the right place. If you sense that your suffering might be more than just bad luck or medical statistics, that there might be a spiritual dimension to your struggle, you're among friends here. This is Sacred Thorns, where we find God in our suffering. I'm Rachel Walters, and I'm honored to wait with you. know that you're not waiting alone.